Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and journey back to a time when your smartphone didn't exist. Netflix was millennia away, and even a simple book was a rare luxury. We often imagine medieval knights jousting or nobles feasting in grand castles. But for the vast majority of people, life was lived in small, isolated villages and their entertainment. Let me tell you, what entertainment was really like in medieval villages sucked. And I mean truly sucked. We're talking about a level of scarcity, simplicity, and sheer physical exhaustion that, frankly, you probably wouldn't survive a single week of. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported to a small, muddy village in medieval Europe, somewhere around the 12th century. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and the faint, persistent odor of livestock. You are no longer a modern observer, you are a peasant, a serf bound to the land whose entire existence revolves around wrestling sustenance from an unforgiving world. And the first most pervasive reality of your life, one that crushes any hope of regular leisure, is work. Work. Work no time for fun. Your life is an unrelenting cycle of agricultural labor. From dawn until dusk, every single day, you are engaged in a brutal battle against the elements and the stubborn earth. Imagine waking before the sun, your body aching from the previous day's toil. Your first task is to tend to the animals, milking cows, feeding pigs, leading sheep to pasture. Then it's off to the fields. Your tools are rudimentary, a heavy wooden plow pulled by oxen, a hand scythe for harvesting, a flail for threshing grain. The work is physically exhausting. You'd spend countless hours in the sun, hunched over, planting seeds, pulling weeds, or meticulously cutting down stalks of grain. In winter, it's equally hard, chopping firewood, mending tools, and enduring the bitter cold. There are no machines, no shortcuts, just the brute force of human muscle and the slow, deliberate pace of medieval agriculture. You work until your hands are raw, your back is screaming, and exhaustion pulls at your very bones. This ceaseless labor is not a choice. It's a necessity. Your survival, and the survival of your family, depends entirely on the success of your harvest. A bad crop means hunger, even starvation. So, every waking moment, every ounce of your energy is dedicated to working the land. The idea of spare time or leisure as we understand it today is almost alien. There's no 8-hour workday, no weekends. The rhythm of your life is dictated by the sun, the seasons, and the unrelenting demands of the lord of the manor, to whom you owe labor, rents, and loyalty beyond the fields. Domestic chores are equally demanding. Your wife is busy spinning wool, weaving fabric, cooking over an open fire, preserving food, and raising numerous children, many of whom won't survive childhood. Your children, as soon as they are old enough, contribute to the labor, whether tending animals, gathering firewood, or helping in the fields. The entire family unit is a machine of continuous labor, focused on wresting a meager existence from the land. Even the concept of relaxation is different. After a long day of back-breaking work, your body is simply too exhausted for anything elaborate. You might collapse onto your straw pallet, fall asleep almost instantly, only to wake with the dawn to repeat the cycle. The thought of engaging in complex games, reading which you likely can't do anyway, or attending a lengthy performance is simply unimaginable. Your entertainment is the simple relief from pain, the warmth of the fire, the quiet company of your family, and the profound satisfaction of a day's survival. And of course, you also owe labor to the Lord. A certain number of days each week, or certain specific tasks, are dedicated to working his fields, repairing his manor, or maintaining his property. This corvée labor further eats into any potential time you might have for yourself or your own farm. Adding another layer of burden, you might resent it, but resistance means severe punishment, often death. While the specifics of feudal labor obligations varied across regions and time, the general principle of peasants owing labor to their lords was a fundamental characteristic of medieval serfdom. So, as you watch the sun set over your medieval village, remember that for the vast majority of its inhabitants, life was a continuous, brutal grind. There was little energy, little opportunity, and certainly little time for anything resembling modern entertainment. Your life was defined by work. Work. Work, no time for fun. A relentless struggle that makes your own busiest days seem like a leisurely stroll. It makes you profoundly grateful for weekends, doesn't it? You felt the crushing weight of relentless labor, leaving almost no time for leisure. But when a rare moment of respite did appear in a medieval village, the entertainment wasn't exactly what you'd call thrilling. It was defined by basic pleasures, simple, scarcely satisfying, a far cry from the rich tapestry of modern entertainment. Largely due to the sheer scarcity of resources, time, and privacy, imagine a Sunday after church, or perhaps a long, dark winter evening when outdoor work is impossible. This is your chance for entertainment. Forget elaborate plays, musical concerts, or intricate board games. Your options are few, incredibly simple, and often repetitive. The village, with its few dozen inhabitants, offers little in the way of organized amusement. One of the most common forms of entertainment was simply socializing and gossiping. Imagine gathering in a neighbor's smoky longhouse, or perhaps outdoors on a rare warm evening, simply talking. News traveled incredibly slowly in the medieval world, so any snippet of information from a neighboring village, a traveler, or a returning soldier was devoured with relish. You discuss the Lord's latest decree, the upcoming harvest, who was marrying whom, or who had recently fallen ill. This wasn't idle chatter, it was a vital way to stay informed, build community, and pass the time. The humor was simple, often crude, focusing on the everyday struggles and quirks of village life. Then there was storytelling. With no books, as most peasants were illiterate and books were incredibly expensive anyway, the oral tradition was paramount. Imagine gathering around the flickering hearth fire, listening to an elder recount tales of local legends, heroic saints, or perhaps a fragment of an epic saga passed down through generations. These stories, often accompanied by gestures and dramatic pauses, provided a window into a larger world, a fleeting escape from the grim realities of daily life. However, the repertoire of stories was limited, and you'd likely hear the same tales repeated countless times over the years. The novelty would wear off, but the comfort of the familiar still remained. Singing and rudimentary music making also offered simple pleasure. You might hear simple folk songs, ballads recounting local events or popular saints' lives, or perhaps devotional hymns learned at church. Musical instruments were basic simple flutes made from bone or wood, crude drums, or perhaps a stringed lyre if someone in the village possessed such a skill. Imagine the raw, unpolished sound of communal singing, voices blending imperfectly, providing a moment of shared rhythm and release after a day of monotonous toil. It wasn't about performance quality, it was about collective expression. For children, entertainment was even more basic. It often involved simple games using natural materials, chasing each other through fields, playing with sticks and stones, or rudimentary forms of hide and seek. There were no toys as we know them, perhaps a handmade wooden doll or a carved animal. Their play was often interspersed with chores, blending work and recreation seamlessly. Even simple physical feats could be a source of amusement. A wrestling match between two strong young men, a contest of strength in lifting a heavy stone, or a foot race could draw a small crowd and provide a brief diversion. The stakes were often nothing more than bragging rights or a round of cheap ale, but the excitement of competition offered a rare thrill. The scarcity of resources also dictated the simplicity of entertainment. You couldn't afford elaborate costumes, complex props, or expensive instruments. Every form of amusement had to be created from what was readily available, using ingenuity and basic materials. This constant constraint meant that creativity was channeled into adapting existing forms rather than inventing new ones. The pervasive exhaustion also limited what counted as fun. After a day of back-breaking labor, your body craved rest, not strenuous activity. Simple, passive forms of entertainment, like listening to stories or chatting by the fire, were preferred over anything that required significant energy. The idea of going out for entertainment was simply not a concept. Entertainment came to you, or you create it from within your immediate circle. So, as you reflect on the meager offerings of a medieval village, remember that entertainment was not about thrills or constant novelty. It was about finding small moments of connection, distraction, and simple pleasure amidst a life of relentless hardship. These were basic pleasures, often scarcely satisfying by modern standards, yet they were cherished for the brief respite they offered from the grinding reality of medieval existence. It makes your most boring Tuesday night feel like a wild party, doesn't it? You've explored the simple, often meager pleasures of daily village life. But for the medieval peasant, the greatest and most significant breaks from relentless toil were inextricably linked to the spiritual realm, the church's shadow, solemn celebrations. Religious festivals, while offering a rare respite and a chance for communal gathering, were deeply structured, morally restrictive, and far from the unbridled revelry we might imagine. Imagine a major feast day, perhaps Christmas, Easter, or the feast of a local patron saint. These holy days, ordained by the church, were often the only guaranteed days off from labor throughout the year. The entire village would gather, not in a grand cathedral, but in your humble, often cold, parish church. The building itself, usually the largest and most ornate structure in the village, was the focal point of all communal life, both spiritual and social. The day would revolve around mass and religious observances. Imagine standing or kneeling for hours during a Latin mass, a language you likely didn't understand, listening to the chanting of the priest and the sermon. The atmosphere was one of solemn reverence, often tinged with fear of divine judgment. The entertainment here wasn't designed for pleasure, but for spiritual edification and moral instruction. You were there to reflect on your sins, to pray for a good harvest, and to reaffirm your place in the divine order. The images on the walls, colorful frescoes depicting saints or terrifying scenes of hell, served as powerful visual sermons, reminding you of your duty and your ultimate fate. After the religious ceremonies, there would be a communal gathering, often in the churchyard or a designated village green. This was a rare opportunity for everyone, from the Lord's bailiff to the humblest serf, to interact outside the strict confines of labor. Food, though still simple, might be a little more plentiful than usual. Perhaps some stewed meat or slightly better bread, and, crucially, ale or cider. This was often the only time you'd consume alcohol in any significant quantity, and it provided a welcome, if fleeting, sense of warmth and conviviality. However, even these celebrations were not free from the church's strictures. Excessive drunkenness, lewd behavior, or anything deemed sinful was frowned upon, and potentially even punished. Priests would deliver stern sermons against gluttony and debauchery, reminding you that even in celebration, spiritual vigilance was required. The laughter might be a little louder, the conversations a little freer, but an underlying sense of moral constraint permeated the festivities. It was a balance between allowing a release valve for pent-up energy and ensuring that the celebration remained within acceptable religious bounds. Sometimes, religious plays or pageants might be performed. These were simple morality plays, put on by villagers, depicting biblical stories or the lives of saints. Imagine watching crude costumes and earnest, if amateur, acting as familiar stories unfolded before your eyes. These performances served a dual purpose. They were a form of entertainment, but also a powerful tool for religious instruction. ensuring that even the illiterate understood the core tenets of their faith. The spectacle, however humble, would have been a rare and memorable event, a fleeting glimpse of drama in a life otherwise devoid of it. Music, often religious in nature, would also be a part of these celebrations. Simple hymns, chanted in Latin or vernacular, would fill the air. While secular folk songs existed, the official church music often set the tone for public gatherings. Dancing, while present, might be more restrained and communal, lacking the wild abandon of later pagan revels. The social hierarchy was always present, even in celebration. The Lord and his family, if present, would occupy a place of honor, receiving the first portions of food and the best ale. You, the peasant, would participate from the sidelines, ever mindful of your place. There was a brief sense of shared humanity, but the underlying social order was never truly forgotten. While the church sought to regulate popular festivities, historians note a persistent tension between official clerical decrees and the more boisterous, folk-oriented customs practiced by villagers, suggesting a degree of unofficial revelry often continued alongside solemn rites. These solemn celebrations were, in essence, carefully managed moments of release. They provided a vital emotional and social outlet. Breaking the relentless monotony of daily toil, they reaffirmed community bonds, reinforced religious faith, and offered a brief escape from the grinding hardships of medieval life. But they were never truly free, always operating under the church's shadow, ensuring that even your most joyous moments were tinged with solemnity and moral instruction. It makes your modern holidays, with their unbridled consumerism, feel quite scandalous, doesn't it? You've experienced the structured, solemn celebrations of the church. But what about the more informal moments? The daily interactions that provided small slivers of entertainment? In medieval villages, community gatherings, gossip, and gloom were the primary social outlets. Where news traveled slowly, life was undeniably hard, and even laughter was often tinged with the pervasive anxieties of survival. Imagine an evening after a long day of labor, or perhaps a break during a communal task like threshing grain. There were no designated community centers or grand public squares for daily mingling. Your gathering place would be practical the village well, where women collected water, the common pasture, where men oversaw their few livestock, or simply within the smoky confines of a neighbor's longhouse during a particularly cold spell. These informal spaces were the lifeblood of village communication. Gossip was a major form of entertainment, and arguably the primary means of news dissemination. With no newspapers, no radios, no internet, every piece of information about your neighbors, your lord, or the outside world was passed by word of mouth, often exaggerated or embellished with each retelling. Imagine huddling with a few other women by the well, whispering about who was ill, who was courting whom, or the latest rumors about the Lord's new tax. This wasn't just idle chatter, it was a vital way to stay informed about your tight-knit community, to build social bonds, and to reinforce shared norms. The sheer lack of external stimuli made every minor event a topic of intense discussion. News from beyond the village was rare and exciting. A traveling merchant, a returning soldier, or a pilgrim passing through might bring fragmented tales of distant towns, a royal decree, or perhaps news of a battle. These stories, often months old, would be devoured with intense interest. Imagine gathering in a small circle, listening intently to a stranger recount events from miles away, filling in the vast blanks of your limited worldview. This was your connection to the wider world, a fleeting window into lives so different from your own. However, these gatherings were also often tinged with gloom. Life was incredibly hard, and the conversations inevitably revolved around shared hardships. You'd discuss the failing crops, the latest outbreak of illness among the children, the oppressive demands of the Lord, or the anxieties of the looming winter. The humor that emerged from these discussions was often dark, born of shared misery, a kind of gallows humor that allowed a brief release from the crushing realities. You might joke about the Lord's pig being fatter than your child, or grimly recount how many chickens were lost to a fox. It was a way of coping, of finding solidarity in suffering. Singing simple folk songs was common. These weren't elaborate compositions, but often straightforward melodies with lyrics about love, loss, labor, or the changing seasons. Imagine a group of men singing a rough, rhythmic chant while working in the fields, or women humming a lullaby as they spun wool. These songs provided a simple, communal pleasure, a way to pass the time and lighten the burden of monotonous tasks. Musical instruments, if present, were basic a crude flute, a drum, or simple stringed instruments. Children's play was integrated into these gatherings. While adults talked, children would be playing simple games with sticks, stones, or running freely through the village. Their laughter, however fleeting, would be a welcome sound in the often somber atmosphere. There were no playgrounds, no organized activities. Their games emerged organically from their environment and their imaginations. The lack of personal space in the longhouse and the absence of formal public spaces meant that true privacy was a luxury. Even your most intimate conversations might be overheard. This communal living fostered a deep interdependence, but also meant that secrets were hard to keep, and social pressures were intense. Gossip, in this environment, could quickly become a tool for social control or ostracism. The pace of life was incredibly slow. There was no rush, no immediate gratification. Entertainment, like everything else, unfolded at a leisurely, unhurried pace, dictated by the natural rhythms of the village. There was a quiet acceptance of simplicity, a resignation to the fact that elaborate pleasures were beyond your reach. So, as you listen to the distant murmur of conversation in a medieval village, remember that these community gatherings were a fragile blend of connection and despair. Gossip and gloom were often the mainstays, reflecting a life of pervasive hardship where joy was fleeting and solidarity was found in shared struggle. It certainly makes you appreciate your fast-paced private internet access, doesn't it? You've experienced the simple community gatherings, where gossip and shared misery were the main entertainment. But the rhythms of medieval life were deeply tied to the land, meaning entertainment itself was seasonal. You would experience seasonal cycles feast or famine fun, with brief, intense periods of indulgence after a successful harvest, contrasting sharply with long stretches of lean, somber existence. Imagine the year unfolding in your medieval village. For most of it, life is a relentless cycle of work and scarcity. The spring is a desperate rush of planting. Summer brings endless weeding and tending. These are times of intense labor and minimal leisure. Any fun is snatched in brief moments of conversation or simple songs during a short break. Your body is perpetually exhausted, your mind focused on the survival of your crops. However, the late summer and early autumn brought the most anticipated event of the year, the harvest. This was the culmination of months of backbreaking labor, and if the weather had been merciful and the crops yielded well, it was a moment of immense relief and profound celebration. The entire village, men, women, and children, would work feverishly to bring in the grain, the grapes, or the hay. The work was still grueling, but it was accompanied by a sense of urgency and shared purpose, knowing that the fruits of your labor would soon be secured. Once the harvest was safely gathered and stored, a period of feast and communal revelry would begin. This was your true holiday season, a rare opportunity for indulgence. Imagine the sheer joy of finally having enough food after months of scarcity. There might be a special feast prepared by the lord of the manor, or more commonly, a series of smaller celebrations within the village. You'd gather with your neighbors, sharing what little extra food and drink you had. Crucially, this was the time for ale and cider. Beer, made from barley, was a staple beverage and a source of calories, but plentiful consumption was often reserved for special occasions. Imagine the warmth spreading through your body, the loosening of your tongue after months of sobriety and stress. Laughter would come more easily, songs would be sung louder, and inhibitions would drop. This was a vital social lubricant, fostering camaraderie and allowing for a temporary escape from the harsh realities. While historians agree on the seasonal nature of medieval feasts, the precise scale and duration of revelry often depended on the regional harvest yield and the local lord's generosity, creating variations in how much fun a village actually had. Games, often simple but robust, would be played. These might include wrestling matches, tests of strength like stone throwing, or foot races. Imagine young men competing fiercely, cheered on by the villagers, the simple spectacle providing a rare thrill. There might be rudimentary forms of ball games or stick fighting. These were often unstructured, physically demanding, and sometimes a bit brutal, but they offered a release for pent-up energy and a chance for individuals to prove their prowess. Storytelling would become more elaborate, with longer sagas and more dramatic performances. Troubadours or traveling minstrels, if they happened to pass through during this brief window of plenty, would be welcomed with open arms, their tales and songs a precious commodity in a world starved for novelty. Imagine the delight of hearing new stories, new melodies, a fleeting glimpse of the wider world brought right to your village square. However, this period of abundance was fleeting. As the days grew shorter and the weather turned cold, the joy would gradually give way to the familiar anxieties of winter. The feast would end, the ale barrels would empty, and you'd return to the grim reality of rationing your dwindling food stores, preparing for the long, lean months ahead. The memory of the harvest celebrations would sustain you through the dark winter, a precious mental image of temporary abundance. The stark contrast between the intense labor and scarcity of most of the year and the brief explosion of feasting and revelry after the harvest defines the rhythm of medieval entertainment. It was not a constant availability of amusement, but a highly cyclical experience, profoundly shaped by the success or failure of the crops. A poor harvest meant no feast, no ale, no moments of relief, just a continuous stretch of gnawing hunger and despair. This was famine fun, a chilling absence of joy. So, as you envision a medieval village, remember that their enjoyment was a fragile, seasonal gift. It was a life of seasonal cycles feast or famine fun, where true merriment was a rare, hard-won commodity, utterly dependent on the whims of nature and the bounty of the land. It truly makes you appreciate year-round access to fresh food and entertainment, doesn't it? You've now tasted the ephemeral joy of harvest festivals and the stark reality of seasonal cycles. But when the fields lay fallow and the longhouse grew dim, one place offered a murky, yet vital center for social life and fleeting escape the alehouse, a rare, murky respite. For the medieval peasant, the local tavern wasn't just a place to drink, it was a gathering spot, a news hub, and a fragile refuge from the relentless grind, though often fraught with its own dangers. Imagine the approach of evening, after a long, arduous day in the fields or spinning wool by the hearth. Your village, small and isolated, offers few public spaces, but there, usually near the village green or by a well-traveled track, stands the alehouse, a simple, often dimly lit structure. It might be little more than a peasant's larger home, or a dedicated hut, recognizable by a bush or a pole hanging outside, signifying its purpose. The smell of stale ale, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies would hit you first, a scent of dubious comfort. Inside, the atmosphere is thick with the murmur of voices, the clatter of earthenware mugs, and the occasional burst of rough laughter. There are no fancy tables or chairs. You'd sit on crude benches or wooden stools, perhaps sharing a worn table with strangers. The lighting would be dim, relying on the flickering flames of a central hearth or a few sputtering rushlights, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The main draw, of course, was the ale. Water was often unsafe, and milk spoiled quickly. Ale, brewed from barley or oats, was a staple beverage for all ages and served as a crucial source of calories. It was much weaker than modern beer, often thin and murky, but it was safer to drink than most water and provided a welcome sense of warmth and relaxation. Imagine savoring your crude, bitter ale, feeling the stress of the day slowly seep from your weary bones. For many, this was the only form of intoxication available, a rare chance to dull the constant ache of fatigue and hardship. The alehouse was the undisputed social hub of the village. This was where news, both local and from further afield, was exchanged. A traveling peddler might bring tales of distant towns, a pilgrim recounting miracles, or a soldier returning from a faraway war sharing grim stories. You'd gather around, hanging on every word, devouring these snippets of information that broadened your incredibly limited worldview. This was your newspaper, your radio, and your social media, all rolled into one. Gossip, as you know, was king, and the alehouse was its unofficial court, for all its simple allure. The alehouse was also a place of lingering dangers. Drunkenness, while common, could easily lead to brawls and violence. Tempers, frayed by poverty and fueled by ale, could erupt over a slight insult, a disputed game of dice, or a romantic rivalry. Imagine a sudden shout, the crash of a mug, and then the sickening thud of fists on flesh as two men, or even groups, descended into a brutal, messy fight, perhaps with knives or broken bottles. Such incidents could lead to serious injury, or even death in a world without proper medical care. You'd learn to keep one eye on your drink and the other on the general mood of the room. The alehouse could also be a place of debt and exploitation. If you were a serf, you might find yourself borrowing money or pledging future labor to the alehouse owner, deepening your already precarious financial situation. Unscrupulous characters might frequent these places, looking to swindle naive peasants out of their meager earnings through rigged games or false promises. For women, the alehouse was often a more cautious space. While women certainly frequented taverns, especially alewives who brewed and sold the ale, they were also more vulnerable to harassment or exploitation. Reputation was everything in a small village, and too frequent or too boisterous a presence in the alehouse could invite gossip or accusations. They might come to collect their husbands, or to sell their own brew, but their interactions were often more guarded. While literary sources occasionally portray medieval taverns as centers of vice, archaeological evidence often shows them as integral community spaces, with varying degrees of order depending on local oversight. Despite these perils, the alehouse remained a vital institution. It offered a temporary escape from the monotony and hardship of daily life. It provided a space for communal gathering, for sharing stories, for letting off steam, and for a brief, alcohol-induced warmth against the perpetual chill of medieval existence. It was a place where, for a few precious hours, the rigid social hierarchy might subtly relax, and a peasant could feel a fleeting sense of camaraderie and belonging. So, as you picture the quaint medieval village, remember the simple, often crude, allure of its alehouse. It was a rare, murky respite, offering fleeting pleasures and a chance for human connection, but always tinged with the dangers of violence, debt, and the relentless reality of a hard life. It truly makes you appreciate a well-lit, non-smoking bar, doesn't it? You found fleeting solace in the alehouse, but when true novelty was sought, the isolated medieval village rarely provided it. Instead, you relied on the power of the spoken word, though it often meant storytelling's simplicity, oral tradition's limits. With no widespread literacy or mass-produced books, narratives were passed down through generations, but often lacked variety, freshness, or the intricate details we expect from modern entertainment. Imagine a long winter evening, the wind howling outside your longhouse, the family huddled around the flickering light of the hearth. This is your primary source of television and books combined. An elder, perhaps a grandparent or a respected village member, might begin to recount a tale. This wasn't a spontaneous act, it was a deeply ingrained cultural tradition, vital for passing down history, morality, and entertainment. The stories you heard would be familiar, deeply embedded in the collective memory of the village. They could be local legends and folk tales. Stories of the cunning fox outwitting the arrogant wolf, of mischievous sprites dwelling in the nearby woods, or of giants who shaped the landscape. These tales often reflected the harsh realities of peasant life, offering simple moral lessons or just a moment of fantastical escape. Imagine listening to the same story about a grumpy troll who lived under the local bridge for the 10th time, yet still finding comfort in its familiarity. Religious narratives, stories of saints, miracles, and parables from the Bible, often simplified and adapted for an illiterate audience. These were powerful tools for moral instruction, ensuring that even those who couldn't read understood the core tenets of their faith. The priest might tell these during church, but they would be retold and reinterpreted in the home. Heroic sagas and epics fragments. You might hear snippets of grander, more complex tales from the Viking Age or earlier Germanic traditions, recounting the deeds of legendary kings, brave warriors, or epic journeys. These were often fragmented, passed down imperfectly, and blended with local lore. Imagine trying to piece together a complex saga from a few remembered verses and a lot of implied details. Family history's tales of your own ancestors, their struggles, their triumphs, and their misfortunes. These were crucial for understanding your place in the family and the village, connecting you to generations past. The simplicity of these stories was a defining characteristic. They often lacked complex plots, nuanced character development, or surprising twists. The language would be direct, repetitive, and formulaic, designed for easy memorization and oral transmission. There were no intricate literary devices. The focus was on clear narrative and moral instruction. Imagine the same phrases, the same descriptions, repeated almost verbatim each time the story was told. The limited repertoire was also a major factor. In an isolated village, without new texts or outside influences, the pool of available stories was small. You would likely hear the same dozen or so tales repeated countless times over your lifetime. This lack of novelty meant that genuine surprise or intellectual stimulation was rare. The entertainment came from the act of communal listening, the warmth of shared experience, rather than the thrill of a fresh narrative. While modern scholars often romanticize oral traditions, the practical reality for medieval peasants was a narrow range of familiar tales. Unlike the diverse and constantly updated entertainment options of urban centers, delivery was key. The storyteller's skill in voice modulation, gesture, and dramatic timing made all the difference. A good storyteller could captivate an audience, even with a familiar tale, injecting it with personality and immediacy. They were the village's unofficial performers, their talent appreciated for the brief escape they offered from the monotony of daily life. However, this reliance on oral tradition also meant an inherent lack of permanence and accuracy. Stories could change over time, details forgotten, elements embellished or altered with each retelling. There was no definitive text to refer back to. No way to check for consistency. History, legend, and personal anecdote often blended seamlessly. Creating a fluid, ever-evolving narrative of the past, the act of listening was often intertwined with mundane tasks. While a story was being told, women would continue spinning wool, children would mend simple tools, and men might be sharpening knives. It was background entertainment, woven into the fabric of daily chores rather than a dedicated, focused activity. So, as you imagine the sounds of a medieval longhouse on a cold night, remember that the entertainment was a testament to storytelling simplicity, born of oral tradition's limits. It was a life where narratives were a precious but finite resource, offering fleeting moments of connection and imagination, but ultimately highlighting the profound scarcity of diverse and novel entertainment in a world without mass media. It makes you profoundly grateful for audiobooks and podcasts, doesn't it? You found the limits of storytelling and the simple amusements of a medieval village. But when pent-up energy needed a release, or when a communal gathering took shape, entertainment often turned to physical contests. For the medieval peasant, these were physical games, brutal and unrefined, far from organized sports, often violent, and lacking the formal rules we associate with modern athleticism. Imagine a village festival, perhaps after the harvest, or on a rare holy day. A space, often the village green or a cleared field, becomes an impromptu arena. There are no grandstands, no referees in striped shirts, just a gathering of villagers, eager for a spectacle. The games weren't about skill and strategy in the way we understand them. They were raw tests of strength, endurance, and often sheer brute force. One common form of entertainment was wrestling. Two young men, perhaps fueled by ale and local pride, would grapple, twisting and straining to throw each other to the ground. There were few, if any, formal rules. Imagine the grunts, the thud of bodies hitting the earth, the dust rising, and the cheers or groans of the crowd. The goal was simply to pin your opponent or force them to submit. Injuries were common: sprained limbs, broken bones, or simply a thorough bruising. This wasn't professional wrestling, it was a rough and tumble affair, often devolving into a messy, painful brawl. Then there were tests of strength. This might involve lifting a heavy stone, throwing a large log caber toss style, but perhaps, or just for distance, or pulling a rope in a tug of war. These events directly showcase the physical prowess so vital to a farmer's life. Imagine two burly peasants straining against a massive rock, their faces red with effort, their muscles bulging, cheered on by their neighbors. The winner earned bragging rights and perhaps a round of free ale, but the effort left them utterly exhausted. Folk football, or rather proto-football, was another popular, incredibly chaotic, and often brutal game. This bore little resemblance to modern soccer or rugby. It involved large teams, sometimes entire villages, attempting to move a ball, often a pig splatter, from one end of a field to another, with very few rules governing how this was achieved. Imagine a sprawling, muddy melee with dozens of men and sometimes women kicking, punching, and tackling, all scrambling for the ball. There were no boundaries, no offsides, no timeouts. Injuries were rampant: broken noses, twisted ankles, concussions, often leading to serious, untreatable wounds. It was a chaotic, often violent, free-for-all, more akin to a riot than a game. While specific rules varied greatly by region and period, medieval football was consistently characterized by its mass participation, lack of formal boundaries, and high potential for injury, as noted by various historical chronicles. Stick fighting or rudimentary forms of fencing with blunt wooden staves were also common. These were dangerous displays of agility and strength, often ending with painful blows and bruised limbs. Participants would learn to block and strike, but without protective gear, serious injuries were a constant risk. You'd watch with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, knowing that a miscalculated swing could result in a nasty injury. Animal-based entertainment, though less common for peasants than for nobles, also existed in simpler forms. Cockfighting might occur, where two roosters were set against each other in a brutal fight to the death, drawing bets and cheers from onlookers. This reflected a harsher sensibility, where entertainment often involved the suffering of animals. The complete lack of formal rules, safety equipment, or professional oversight made these games incredibly perilous. There were no coaches to teach proper technique, no medics on standby. An injury sustained during a game, whether a simple sprain or a broken bone, could mean weeks of lost labor, a reduced harvest, and immense hardship for your family. A permanent disability could spell ruin, forcing you to rely on charity or face starvation. Despite the inherent dangers and their unrefined nature, these physical games served as vital outlets. They provided a release for pent-up energy and frustration, a chance for men to test their strength and assert their dominance, and a rare opportunity for communal excitement. They also reinforced local identities, with villages often competing fiercely against each other, even if it meant a few broken bones. It was raw, visceral entertainment, mirroring the harshness of their daily lives. So, as you picture medieval villagers at play, remember that their games were far from genteel. They were physical games, brutal and unrefined, a chaotic display of strength and aggression, often leading to pain and injury. It's a stark reminder that even in their moments of fun, medieval peasants faced considerable peril, turning their sports into a grim dance with potential disaster. It certainly makes you appreciate modern sports medicine, doesn't it? You've witnessed the brutal simplicity of medieval physical games, but in the isolated, static world of the medieval village, true novelty and professional spectacle were incredibly rare. Only occasionally would the monotony be broken by traveling entertainers, fleeting glimpses, bringing brief moments of excitement and wonder that quickly vanished, leaving the villagers to return to their drab reality. Imagine a sudden murmur rippling through your village. A traveler, perhaps a peddler or a returning pilgrim, has brought news a minstrel or a small troupe of jugglers and acrobats is making their way through the region, and they might even pass through your humble village. This news would spread like wildfire, a rare spark of anticipation in a life otherwise devoid of regular excitement. When they finally arrived, it would be an event. These traveling entertainers were itinerant professionals, eking out a living by performing for meager coins or simple hospitality. They were often viewed with a mixture of suspicion and fascination. Outsiders who brought tales and spectacles from beyond your limited horizon. The minstrel was perhaps the most common. Imagine a lone figure, perhaps with a lute or a simple fiddle, standing on the village green or in the Lord's courtyard. He would sing ballads of heroic deeds, recite long, epic poems often truncated and simplified for a peasant audience, or perform satirical songs about local lords or popular events. His voice, perhaps rough but strong, would fill the air, offering a fleeting escape into a world of adventure, romance, or humor. You'd listen intently, soaking in every word, every note, a rare connection to the broader cultural tapestry beyond your village. The new stories, the fresh melodies, would be a precious commodity. Then there were the jugglers and acrobats. Imagine watching wide-eyed as a performer tosses several brightly colored balls or knives into the air, keeping them in a dizzying rotation. Or perhaps a nimble acrobat performs daring tumbles and handstands, defying gravity with impressive agility. These were simple feats by modern standards, but in a world where such displays were virtually unheard of, they would have seemed almost magical, a moment of pure wonder. Children would gasp in delight, and even the most jaded adult would crack a rare smile. While detailed records of peasant entertainment are scarce, various medieval illuminated manuscripts occasionally depict traveling performers, confirming their presence in rural life. You might also encounter animal handlers or bear baiters. While morally repugnant to us today, watching a trained monkey perform simple tricks, or a bear being tormented by dogs, was a crude form of entertainment for some. This reflects the harsher sensibilities of the age, where entertainment often involved cruelty to animals. A stark contrast to the more refined spectacles of the nobility. The key word here is fleeting. These entertainers rarely stayed for more than a day or two. They were constantly on the move, chasing the next village, the next meager payment. Their visit was a brief, dazzling interruption in the otherwise monotonous rhythm of your life. You'd gather to watch them perform, perhaps throwing a few copper coins into a cap, or offering them a meal and a place to sleep by your fire. You'd soak in every moment, knowing that soon they would be gone, and the long, dreary routine of work would return. The cost of such entertainment was also a factor. Peasants had very little disposable income. While some performers might accept payment in kind food, a place to sleep, actual coinage was scarce. This limited how often such entertainment could visit, and how much villagers could truly participate beyond simply watching. The impact of these traveling entertainers, though brief, was profound. They provided a vital connection to the outside world, bringing new stories, new songs, and new perspectives. They offered a temporary escape from the grinding reality of daily life, a chance to forget the hunger, the cold, and the endless toil, if only for an hour or two. They were a reminder that a larger, more varied world existed beyond the muddy paths of your village. So, as you imagine the quiet, isolated medieval village, picture that rare day when a colorful figure, a traveling minstrel, or a skilled juggler brought a spark of magic to an otherwise drab existence. These were fleeting glimpses of entertainment, precious and rare, but quickly swallowed by the relentless return to necessity. It truly makes you appreciate instant access to countless forms of entertainment at your fingertips, doesn't it? You've witnessed the brutal simplicity of their games and the fleeting magic of traveling entertainers. As we conclude our exploration of medieval village entertainment, let's reflect on a life of drab necessity, how the entire existence of the medieval peasant was a relentless struggle for survival, leaving little room for joy, creativity, or the kind of varied amusement we take for granted today. Imagine looking back at your life as a medieval peasant. What stands out? The endless cycle of planting and harvesting, the gnawing hunger during winter, the constant ache in your back, the smoky darkness of your longhouse. Entertainment, in this context, was not a pursuit of pleasure, but a vital, often desperate means of endurance. A small flicker of light against overwhelming hardship. The most profound legacy of medieval village entertainment is its scarcity. This was a life utterly dominated by the demands of basic survival. Every waking moment, every ounce of energy, was dedicated to wresting sustenance from an unforgiving land. There was simply no time, no surplus energy, and no disposable income for elaborate forms of amusement. Your leisure was the absence of immediate labor, not an opportunity for recreation. This fundamental scarcity shaped every aspect of their recreational lives. This scarcity led to simplicity and repetition. Their entertainment was rudimentary simple songs, familiar stories, basic games with sticks and stones, and the occasional shared ale. These activities were not about novelty or complexity. They were about finding comfort in the familiar and sharing a moment of respite with one's immediate community. The lack of variety, while perhaps monotonous by modern standards, was a given, an accepted reality. While some historians point to regional variations in folk customs, the overall consensus is that peasant entertainment was fundamentally simple and locally focused, especially when compared to courtly or urban entertainments. The entertainment was also deeply communal and integrated into daily life. It wasn't something you went out to do, it happened during chores, after meals, or as part of religious festivals. Gossip by the well, songs in the fields, stories by the hearth. These were woven into the fabric of their existence, not separate, dedicated activities. This fostered strong community bonds where entertainment was a shared experience. Reflecting the collective struggles and triumphs of the village, the pervasive threat of hardship and death cast a long shadow over every celebration. A bad harvest, an illness, a raid. Any of these could swiftly extinguish any joy and plunge the village back into despair. Their moments of fun were fragile, temporary respites, always conscious of the precariousness of their existence. The underlying gloom of a hard life was rarely far from the surface, even in moments of celebration. Finally, the legacy of medieval village entertainment is a stark reminder of the immense value of modern comforts and conveniences. We live in a world where entertainment is instantly accessible, incredibly diverse, and tailored to every possible whim. We have leisure time, disposable income, and a vast infrastructure to support our pursuit of pleasure. The medieval peasant had none of this. Their life was defined by what was necessary, not what was desired. Their fun was a testament to human resilience, to the ability to find small sparks of joy even in the most arduous and monotonous of existences. So, as you flick through countless streaming options or pick up a gaming controller, take a moment to reflect on the medieval peasant. Their life was a constant grinding battle against necessity, and their entertainment was a precious, hard-won commodity, often crude, repetitive, and deeply intertwined with the grim realities of their world. It was indeed a life of drab necessity, making every small moment of relief, every shared laugh, a minor miracle in a world utterly devoid of trivial pleasures. It makes your own vast array of entertainment choices feel truly decadent, doesn't it? All right. As the last echoes of our journey through medieval village entertainment fade into the quiet of the night, it's time to gently bring our minds back to the present. You've sat by their smoky hearths, heard their simple songs, and perhaps even felt the chill of their scarcity. It's a powerful reminder that history, in its quietest corners, often reveals the most poignant truths about human ingenuity and the enduring search for joy, even in the hardest of times. Let the images of relentless work, simple pleasures, and constant worries fade away, giving way to the quiet peace that surrounds you. The smell of damp earth and the air of remote villages fade, giving way to the familiar comfort of your own space. Let any lingering thoughts of the tedium and dangers of medieval life drift away, replaced by a sense of ease and peaceful reflection. The struggles and small joys of the peasants of old now, temporarily, become part of your understanding, enriching your sense of history and the value of leisure in modern life. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes, know that the stories of the past are always here, waiting patiently to be rediscovered whenever you seek a gentle escape into the depths of time. But for now, the journey is complete. Rest easy, knowing that another story has been revealed gently, just for you.